Hey guys, this is Pablo with Meditation Amsterdam. In today's video, I want to be answering a question that came by from a lady who has been working with the embodiment course that I launched a couple of weeks ago. If you haven't checked it out, it's on sale at my Patreon for $7, and it contains 5 basic videos with explanations and practices for embodiment, made pretty much with this sort of same no-frills quality that I make for the YouTube videos. And her question goes like this. She says, how would embodiment exercises help me to experience myself as an immortal soul who is separate from the mortal body? It seems to me that embodiment is a downward movement rather than an upward movement to reconnect with our original nature as souls who are naturally sovereign over the mind, intellect, and samskaras. Sanskara or samskara refers to mental knots or things that coalesce into a mistake in the mind that prevents us from seeing our real nature and also make us act in a kind of repetitive way. Samskaras are almost like the hooks that karma uses to pull you left and right. Now, so this question goes really to the heart of why embodiment is such a tool, actually, and why I'm such a big fan of the more tantric type practices in Taoism as opposed to the pure mental ones, although I practice both. But in essence, Taoism is and Tantra are practices that believe in working with the grain of the senses in order to refine them up to the level where you come to realize that everything that you see through your senses is nothing but the divine. And it goes very much with the grain of what Taoism is all about. So Taoism, as high-minded and yin-yang and cosmological as it sounds, has its roots very deeply into the mundane. And they have this whole analogy about water, how one should be like water, adapt like water, flow like water, but equally interesting, be like water in the sense that water always sinks to the lowest levels, always covers things from the bottom up. So embodiment is precisely that, and it goes with the grain of those Taoist practices that have to do really with the body, such as practicing Tai Chi, for example. Now, the question contains one crucial issue as I read it, which I think is worth pointing out, in case you noticed already, which can be dispelled even before you get to answering the part about embodiment proper. She says, myself as an immortal soul who is separate from the mortal body. Well, this is not really the case, because in reality, nothing is separate from anything else. Apparent separations are perceived by ourselves because our mind fragments itself into functional parts as we develop in our early years, and even in our early months, as a matter of fact. So you could think of the mind as this kind of prism. I don't know if you guys are familiar with the Pink Floyd prism. So there's a beam of light coming in one side of the prism, and then a rainbow appears at the other side, and that's what prisms do. They break light apart into different colors. And the mind does the same with reality. Reality is a single, unitary or unified whatever, which the mind separates into parts so that it can navigate it. So now the mind does this through a number of things, and I've spoken about, for example, object relations theory, about memory-based snapshots that the mind takes of things. But the mind is also functionally split into parts, and its job is to render reality for you so that you can navigate it. So everything you are looking at is a kind of dashboard, is a 4-dimensional, if you include time, dashboard of whatever quantum soup we're swimming in. We don't know what we're swimming in, really. But whatever it is, the mind has grown and taken the trouble to render it for you in a way that you can navigate. Part of that rendering that the mind is making for you includes what you call the body. So that the body is being rendered by your mind. And the rendering has a visual aspect, so you could look at your hand, for example. But the rendering also has a somatic aspect, so you can feel the pull of gravity on you, you can feel your skin, you can feel all these different things. Now, when we have our mind become fragmented by our human development, we lose track of the fact that the mind has been fractured or fragmented functionally. And we lose track, or maybe we never really realize, that what we're looking at is a rendering of reality. That's why we're not awake. And that rendering is very, very convincing to an untrained mind. The untrained mind will take an object and it will see it as A, real, right? It will see it as B, physical, right? So it will actually make it into a thing, which can be touched, is physical, has its own reality. And 3, it'll make it into an other. In other words, it's not you. You have a self, and this object is another thing, which has its own physicality. And that is the conventional view of things from the mental perspective when the mind has not undergone a refinement process. And most people don't. So most people see reality through that lens. Now, you can refine your senses so that things start to look a little bit more topsy-turvy, a little bit more real in the ultimate reality sense of the word, and less real from a mental sense of the word. I remember as a kid, I used to sometimes look in the mirror for a while and just stare into my own eyes, and your face starts to sort of move around and does stuff like that. It's kind of trippy and funny. It's kind of stuff that kids do. And that's closer to the way the real looks. It's a kind of psychedelic rendering. The point being, the refinement of your senses starts to do that so that you can see the rendering as a rendering of the real, as opposed to making it something that it's not. The body is the same. The body can be used, or rather the feeling of the body can be used in order to refine your senses. The more you embody, the more you run your mind through the body and scan and feel and do exercises and breath work and you name it, to clarify what you are actually feeling, the less physical it becomes, the less physical it feels. So physicality as a notion is a very gross notion. It's to call something a physical thing is kind of shorthand for what it actually is. It's part of that rendering capacity that we were talking about. So when you do embodiment exercises, what you are doing is you are clarifying your perception of matter, in this case the matter of the body, so much that you can't at some point start but to notice that matter is not really what it appears to be when it's aggregated and unclarified. When you're just kind of seeing it and feeling it, but not really. It acquires all these characteristics that I was describing earlier on. But when you do the work of clarification, matter starts to be realized as nothing but mind that had not recognized itself, or mind rendering that had not recognized itself. And that's what in these esoteric, or rather perennial practices, is called the redeeming of matter into spirit. In other words, it's not that matter and spirit are two separate things. It's that matter is spirit that has kind of calcified itself and it has stopped recognizing itself as spirit. And through the work of refinement of consciousness and refining of your senses, in this case through the vehicle of the body, you redeem matter from its stuck nature, in which it has become things which are all separate and clunky, and you redeem it into spirit that had not recognized itself, until it's fully recognized that the apparent separation between, quote unquote, your immortal soul and the separate mortal body was not really there. There is no such thing as the mortal body. There is only a mental rendering of whatever this may be. We don't know, right? That's the great mystery, of course. And so to the question of the lady, embodiment exercises help you experience yourself as an immortal soul by coming to, through refinement of your perception, notice that you were never an immortal soul separate from a mortal body. That was part of the low resolution that the mind uses to render things. It looks very high resolution, and it does a phenomenal job, by the way, but it does it only well enough so that it can survive, right? It doesn't do it well enough so that it can come to question, wait a second, this is just a screen I'm looking at. It just never goes into that space. And in this whole refinement process, the body is a supreme vehicle for that, because you can work with it all the time. And it takes very little effort to do so if you know exactly what you're doing and why you're doing it. It's a magnificent vehicle for self-realization in this case. Now, she mentions the samskaras. The samskaras are errors in the mind and illusions in the mind that keep you in a repetitive loop, as I said, but also they make you misperceive things. The way a samskara would make you misperceive things is by aggregating it into what appears to be an object or a situation that is not. And in order to dissolve samskaras, we can't really fight with them. We can't really resist them, because we would be using the very mind that has them. But what you can do is you can just clarify things more and more so that they become apparent for what they are. For example, when I work with people and we try to do emotional resolution of things, we want to break the situation apart into the physical sensations, the emotional tone, the mental story behind them, and also the sense of self that is at the mercy of all these, of this whole problem, right? So you want to almost spread things out like a fan and break them apart into manageable, discernible components that make it clear that you are not really dealing with a problem, or that the trauma was not what you thought it might have been. This is very, very important work, because samskaras are made up of that sort of mistaking something for what is not. Now, yogic literature has plenty of analogies to explain this point. One classic analogy is that of a whirlpool, right? So a whirlpool looks like a pattern. It looks like and sometimes almost a thing, right? But it's definitely a pattern, and you can see it. And if you get hypnotized by the whirlpool shape and movement, you lose sight of the fact that it's just water, right? It's fundamentally water. The same goes for the analogy they use about jewelry, right? They talk about, a bracelet or earrings or rings and, different sizes and shapes or whatever. Through treating it as objects that go into different parts of the body and are used for different decorative purposes, you lose track of the fact that you are only ever just looking at gold, which is the essence of jewelry. So the ego is, in fact, such a thing, and is made up of all these distorted look at things, in which all the movements of the mind, all its patterns and all the shapes that it takes obscure the fact that you are only ever really looking at the mind. Yeah, so it's that same thing. Now there is a follow-up question, as I said, which I might as well also get at, which is, she says that she finds it difficult to sit and meditate. She gets good experiences here and then, but sometimes just keeps trying to feed herself with more information about the practices rather than just getting it done. And she says, in the end, impermanence will be dissolved, and all that is left is that which is permanent. And so I want to be able to make that connection firm. How would this embodiment help? So the way embodiment helps to solidify your practice and help you sort of grab onto that which is real and permanent is, first of all, the more embodied you are, the less your focus of attention goes to your mind, to your thinking mind. And the thinking mind starts to feel ever more reassured when the focus of attention sits in the body, so thoughts tend to start to naturally subside more and more. The mind can spin its wheels endlessly because the space in which it lives is totally intangible, but the body can have this grounding effect. So one of the essences of grounding is, in fact, the ability to keep your mind inside the feeling of the body. But more importantly, once you have used the body to refine your senses enough, your real nature starts to emerge as a noticing, so that the body is a vehicle for not just the refinement of the consciousness, but the light of awareness to then be able to pass through that consciousness. So once the consciousness is refined and you come to realize that you are looking at a rendering, that rendering becomes transparent. And when it becomes transparent, it is seen as a kind of idea or as a kind of space that the mind has created for itself to do things, which means nothing's trying to do anything to you, because there is no you and there is no thing. This unitary, more harmonious relationship grows inside the mind with its own renderings. And when that happens, the mind becomes more pacified because it has no need then to start ruminating about this situation or that person or whatever, right? So that stability comes. When that rumination dies down, the pure light of awareness that you have always been starts to realize itself, starts to go, well, hold on a second. Now, I thought I was a mind body with thoughts and this and that. I thought I was a piece of jewelry or a whirlpool. But now that the whirlpool, say that you would freeze a whirlpool on the dot, it stops spinning, right? Like the water is now completely frozen. So the whirlpool goes, hang on a second. I thought I was the movement of spinning in a certain shape. But now that that movement of spinning in a certain shape has stopped, I come to realize I'm something else, something more fundamental than the movement. I'm actually water. The mind does exactly the same, or the self does the same. The self has confused itself with the movements of the mind, your thoughts, your personality, your body shape, all these kind of things. When those become not so much frozen in this case, but more transparent, then awareness goes, hold on a second. If all these things are not me, then what am I? And then the realization arises that awareness is what you really are. That awareness comes to realize itself as the self, taking all kinds of shapes. And then awareness goes, well, that's pretty clear. I am empty lucidity. And because I'm empty and because I'm lucid, I'm like a crystal ball that just takes in all these colors and things and sort of ends up confusing itself with them. But that's not what you are. So I suppose I went all the way into explaining a little bit of the enlightenment process in the end, but this is essentially what it is. And the body can be an amazing vehicle to realize this process because it's very grounding. And in the process of cleaning out the samskaras and refining your consciousness through the body, you also resolve all those samskaras. And therefore, your psychology becomes also a lot healthier, actually, a lot more wholesome, more inclusive, more creative. I can't speak of other paths. I think ultimately all paths lead to the same place. But this idea that the path of embodiment is a downward path is kind of correct in the way you are pointing your attention and dealing with the gross. But what you are doing is you are dealing with the grossest. In the nature of Taoism, you go as water and you sink to the lowest possible level and you start to refine from there. And then you refine upwards. If you start trying to refine the mind directly, you're going to get lost in it. You won't have the juice, you won't have the focus or the stability to deal with it. It's going to take you for a ride. It takes people for a ride for ages when they try to do just meditation and things of that kind. So the path of embodiment is actually a very sure-footed, stable, plausible, but also very gradual and wholesome path. And nevertheless, when taken seriously, it just delivers results very effectively and very quickly as well. So I'm very curious to hear about your experiences. And as I said, check out the course. It's $7 on the Patreon, and it gets you started in a really good way when it comes to embodiment. Do share your comments and questions on the comments. And as usual, if you think that these videos are helpful to others, then your liking, your sharing, and subscribing is very handy to get the YouTube more visible, and it's also very motivating to me. I'll be back with more pretty soon. Cheerio. Bye-bye.